Hi everyone. Today we'll replace the brake fluid of the Zen. Brake fluid must be replaced at least once every 3 years because brake fluid is hygroscopic, which means it absorbs moisture from the atmosphere, and therefore your boiling point of the fluid reduces, and as the car keeps on running the braking efficiency reduces. So ensure that you replace the brake fluid every 3 years. Now, let me briefly explain the procedure of flushing the brake fluid. The first step is to suck out as much as brake fluid as possible from the reservoir. This component right here is the brake master cylinder, which distributes the brake fluid to all the four wheels. We'll drain the fluid from the farthest wheel from the master cylinder, which is the rear left wheel. Then we come to the rear right wheel. Then we come to the front left wheel, and we come to the driver's side wheel. A bleeder valve has been given in each of the wheel, which has to be loosened using a ring spanner to drain the fluid. A tube is used to drain the fluid. A person seated inside the driver's seat will be depressing the brake pedal. With the pedal depressed, you loosen the bleeder valve and drain the brake fluid. With the fluid drained, you close the bleeder valve and repeat this process. You have to ensure that air does not enter into the system, because if air is present in the brake lines, it will make the brakes very spongy and that will reduce the effectiveness of the brake. So ensure that there's no air in the lines. So the first step is to collect as much brake fluid from the fluid reservoir as possible. This long plunger that I have in my hand, it's called a turkey baster. You get this in those shops that deal with aquarium supplies. Alternately, you can also use a large syringe to drain the fluid. What I have in my hand right now is a bleeder bottle. It's basically a soda bottle with one end immersed in the fluid that we just collected, and the other end has a non-return valve. Now, this non-return valve, you'll get it in those shops that deal with aquarium supplies. You can get this tubing in any of the hardware stores that deal with day-to-day hardware. The other end is immersed in fluid, as you can see, because you do not want air to be sucked back into the system when the foot is taken off the pedal. So that is essentially what the bleeder bottle consists of. So we have already drained some fluid from the reservoir. Now what we'll do is we'll top it up with some fresh brake fluid. I have some Bosch Dot 3 brake fluid with me. Once you have topped up the fluid, replace the cap back into the reservoir. As I had mentioned before, we'll start from the farthest wheel from the brake master cylinder, which is the rear left wheel. You are going to need a 10-11 ring spanner. This right here is the bleeder valve through which you'll be draining the fluid. Insert the ring spanner over the bleeder valve. Insert the tube of the bleeder bottle over the valve. In the next step, the second person has to be seated at the driver's seat, and he has to pump the brake pedal several times and hold it depressed before you loosen the bleeder valve screw. And therefore communication is very important in this procedure.
Keep on depressing and pressing. Then keep it depressed.
After pumping the brake pedal several times, once your friend confirms that he has depressed the brake pedal, loosen the bleeder valve and let the brake fluid come out.
Pump.
Notice that as your friend keeps on pumping the brake pedal, the fluid keeps rushing out from the bleeder valve.
Keep on pumping.
After draining some amount of fluid from one wheel, ask your friend to keep the pedal depressed while you tighten the bleeder valve. Once you have tightened the bleeder valve, replace the dust cap back into its place. On the rear right wheel, we'll replace the brake bleeder valve because the hex head of the valve has been damaged and it has become sort of stripped off. So what we'll do is we'll replace it with a new one. Remove the old valve using a wrench or a plier and replace it with this new valve. Some amount of brake fluid will come out through the socket the moment you remove the old valve, but since there's not enough pressure in the line as you're not pressing on the brake pedal, not much amount of fluid would come out, so don't worry about that. Once you have threaded the new valve in the socket, don't tighten it with the ring spanner yet, because you are anyway going to have to loosen it to drain the brake fluid from the system. Next up, connect the bleeder bottle's tubing to the valve to do the bleeding process.
चले जा.
You loosened it?
No, not yet. You go build up the pressure, then I'll loosen it. Done. I'll open it. Brake pedal depressed.
Ah.
You can clearly see the pale yellow brake fluid pushing out the old red fluid out of the system. You can see the air coming out in the form of bubbles, which came into the system when we changed the bleeder valve. Guys, very important, please keep an eye out on the brake fluid reservoir levels for the fluid not to drop below the minimum mark, because if it goes low, you're going to again introduce air into the system. So ensure that you top it up from time to time.
Depress. Keep pressing.
Pump the pedal. Pump it. At this point where we observe that there are no bubbles coming out of the line, we have stopped the process. Guys, all this mess that you see behind the drum brake of the brake fluid, which is overflown, you've got to clean it using a very good brake cleaner spray to get rid of all that residue. So guys, this is that old bleeder valve with the worn out head. It is also rusted on the threads. And these bleeder valves are dirt cheap because they belong to Maruti's parts bin. And if you are flushing the brake fluid, that's the perfect time to change these rusted bleeder valves, because otherwise rust will enter into the brake fluid through these brake lines and that will contaminate the whole system. So we have bled the rear left wheel and the rear right wheel. Now comes the front left wheel. The process is exactly the same like the other wheels, except we are going to insert the hose into the bleeder valve in front of the caliper. So connect the hose. Start pumping. Loosen the spanner when sufficient pressure has been developed in the brake line. The old brake fluid is getting pumped out of the system, which is clearly visible. In a short while, the new pale yellow brake fluid will replace it, as it is visible. You can see here. Once you notice the clear brake fluid coming out of the line, you can stop the process there. Do not over tighten these bleeder valves. Guys, after each wheel is done, please keep an eye out for the brake fluid levels in the reservoir, because you do not want it to go lower below the minimum level mark. The last one is the driver side wheel, which is the front left wheel. So the process is exactly the same as that of the front right wheel. So repeat that. Guys, I'm extremely sorry for this bad angle of capturing the video. All that is visible seems to be my jockey Bermudas and my orange tea. So we have bled the complete system and we have flushed about so much quantity of the stock brake fluid from the Zen. We have used Bosch's Dot 3 brake fluid, which is transparent and rather pale yellow in shade. So it's easy to identify the change as well. Once you're done with brake bleeding exercise, the next thing you've got to do is to test the brakes. So take the car for an extended test drive. But before you do that, depress the brake pedal several times so the piston on the brake calipers bed in properly and it rests on top of the brake pads. And take the car for a long test drive and ensure that there's no sponginess in the brake when you depress the brake pedal, because if there is sponginess, air is trapped into the system and you should remove it, because air is not good for the system. Now let's see the parts used in this DIY. 2 bottles of 500 ml brake fluid. This is the bleeder valve used in the rear drum brake assembly. This is the exploded view of the rear drum brake assembly. That would be all, guys. Thank you so much.